Hey everybody, welcome back. Writing for Media. I'm actually going to use this tape to actually address all three of my classes because everything has been so erratic lately. Um, Involving my online classes, I teach three classes, just so you all know. Of course, I'll be addressing my online class too. You all have the same assignments, so it's just that there's just a difference in you know basically, obviously, the platform and how you're learning and that sort of thing, and things like class participation. So. Um, I hope things weren't too confusing as far as like directions are concerned, but we had I don't know if you call it unlucky or not, but we had this situation, the unfortunate consequences of two snowstorms, which I don't know, didn't really blow me away, but whatever. It would have been difficult to park and everything else and maybe get the class on time. But I teach Tuesday and Friday in-person classes, 8:30 and 10:20, and both were moved to online, so I submitted last week's online video to use for all three classes. Even though in that video I addressed really the asynchronous class only. This class, this time I'm actually going to address all three. Again, just kind of, and then of course I'm going to follow my in-person classes. I'm going to follow this up on Tuesday. I fully expect to have in-person class on Tuesday, so hopefully that won't be an issue. Weather's supposed to get warmer, the whole thing. I mean, as far as like class participation is concerned, I mean, I talked about how that is for asynchronous, so we have discussion points. I expect people to hand in work on time. I expect people to ask questions, things like that. I mean, for the in-person classes, it's similar, but of course, I don't only have discussion points. You use them very rarely because we actually have discussions in class. In the in-person classes, we actually will be doing writing in class. The reason why I didn't do another videotape on Friday is because I actually wanted to write in class. I like using the in-person classes like writing labs, that sort of thing, so I can actually look over your work. And I expect people to ask questions like you would in like I expect people to the asynchronous classes, the same thing. To be interested in your work, to be invested in your work. I expect people to rewrite. This actually applies to all classes. If you have like a B plus, I said that basically you should rewrite it into an A. Don't forget, that syllabus again applies really, except for those three or four spots where it's asynchronous applied. But um, I um, I expect people to actually like to rewrite their stories even if they don't have to. The grading scale again is A, B plus B, C plus C. And then for the first draft, it's again an R. And then, if you don't rewrite it, if you get an R and you don't rewrite it, it's actually an F. In that case of an R, you have to rewrite it. Um, but if you get a C or above, except for an A, of course, you can rewrite it for a higher grade. I don't, One clarification about that, by the way, if somebody actually, I've had people actually submit assignments that are worse. Sometimes, a lot of times I actually will talk to the person after that, because maybe something was missed there or something like that, but I do not actually give a person a lower grade on a rewrite. I give them the same grade if it's not any better or even worse, so. But that's part of this class is really that's the best way to learn is to actually learn by doing. And in fact, some of you have already submitted. A number of you, I'm taping this over the weekend, but a number of you have already submitted your rewrite or sorry your ungraded what I call bio assignment, profile assignment, self profile assignment. That's to basically again to kind of get you off the ground running, give you an idea. Like I'm going to go to my screen here to give you an idea of like what I'm looking for in terms of actually a story writing right off the bat without assigning a letter grade to it. And just, got Miriam right here. Oh, not Miriam. I'm sorry, not Miriam. I was going to show here. I was going to show one of the students from one of the three classes. Um, Brian. Okay, Brian. Okay, so this is like this typical like feedback I provided, and also this is also class participation, and this is for all three classes. It's actually submitting this particular assignment. again, I'm not grading it, but if you didn't submit it, then that's not good, okay? Then this is all part of trying, so trying to get better, trying to boost your rating, because again, a lot of people who take this class do not, have actually not actually done any kind of journalism or anything like that, or maybe they've done journalism, but it's like social media journalism or that sort of thing. Um, so, um, anyway, so that's what that's what that I'm sorry, I got I got a little thrown off. Gets teasing me. So by the way, this is my dog. My doggy. Um, Hi Bruiser. Say hi, Bruiser. Say hi, my boy. Um, so anyway, but as you can see here, I don't expect people to know everything right off the get bat. As I explained last week, the grading system, I grade on progress, I care more about your last assignments than your first. And by the way, I also have a new assignment that'll be for all three classes. It's the same assignment. And then another big difference is obviously is that the um, the assignments for the online asynchronous classes will be due on Mondays. And the assignments for the in-person classes, since they are on Tuesday, will be on Tuesday. So that's the big difference there. So anyway, so I would like to see this again, it's a little bit early, but when I'm taping this, but I'd like to see this for the asynchronous class done by the end of Monday. Please submit it by then. And for the in-person classes done by the end of Tuesday. Okay, this is where you basically write in third person. Sorry for that mishap there. Third person. You write about yourself as though you're interviewing yourself. Okay. Brian Wang is an American-born Taiwanese freshman studying in Rutgers University School of Arts and Sciences. He's not declared a major yet. Now, look, I'm not penalizing people by like basically critiquing the work. I'm just trying to give you an idea, but you're letting me know, and I appreciate that, and you're expressing your, who you are and that sort of thing. But what I'm trying to basically do is trying to direct you toward essentially what the lead, and the lead is essentially the first paragraph of the story. It's the paragraph that identifies what the story is about. Okay. I'll get to that in a second, but basically what you could theme the story around. And a couple of you I've noticed, I movie lover, that seemed a little bit interested in me, especially the specific genre that he's into. But at the same time, I also thought that like I saw a couple of you photography people, so that's actually interesting. And one thing I'm always interested in knowing about is like how do you do that? There's not a lot of, a lot of people do that like professionally, that sort of thing, but how do you do that while you're going to school? I've learned how to do that myself, and I found that to be a very difficult task, especially getting all the settings right and everything else. Indoor photography, that sort of thing is very difficult with the flash. The equipment is expensive. So I would like to, I would saying that should be basically the lead up here. What he's saying up here, it's fine and everything, but it's like we could say this about a lot of people. What I'm looking for is what we can't say about a lot of people, and that's what he's doing right here. Also, like I'm starting with some Associated Press style already. Brian Wang, basically it's the full name on first reference when you first identify the person, Brian Wang. On second reference, and later references, you'd call the person Wang, by the last name. The idea being there is that it's usually more objective, more unique is the last name and the first name. So more objective because calling somebody Brian sounds like you're friends with them, that sort of thing. So it's also appearance, that sort of thing. So it's last name on second and future reference. Okay. So that was Brian right there. So I would have said I'll talk about photography. And then what you want to do is you want to get into the who, what, where, how, why, how and why. It's like what they call the 5 W's. I dealt with a little bit last week, but let me show you a little bit about what that is. Okay. So Brian Wang, photography. Okay. While student, that, write it better than that. It's not really a complete sentence. Okay. But that could be your theme identified in the lead, which is and answers this question: what is the story about? And then what it does is you actually kind of slice it even thinner in terms of an angle, and you say, why do I care? And one of the reasons you should think about why do I care is because maybe it's something that not everybody does, or it's something that's unique to many people, So that's what you want to identify in the lead. And yes, this is how lead is typically spelled in journalism, editing, and writing. To differentiate it from LEAD or lead. So, and then the rest of the story, again, I talked about this last week. Usually you get into the what and the why first, okay? And then maybe how it's done. And then these are almost like handled by individual paragraphs, okay? You want to get into a little bit of the where, obviously, Rutgers University, maybe, or where do you do the photography, that sort of thing. I did how. Who, what, where, I mean, obviously we talk about who. These are certain things that need to be identified in the lead, like who, you know, probably where, that sort of thing. Need to be identified right away. But then in your second, your third paragraphs, fourth paragraphs, maybe you get into the what and the why. Okay. What is this about? Why do you do it? How can you do it? Get into the how too. What do you take pictures of? That sort of thing. How do you afford that equipment that's like so expensive? That sort of thing. That's what you do. Okay. And that's what I want you to do actually in this first assignment. Okay. Now there's gonna be some, actually I shouldn't say the assignment is exactly the same. Okay. So, what we're going to do is okay, this is for the remote classes. You're going to interview somebody you know, okay? I'm sorry, and actually that's right here, okay? Profile of somebody you know, okay? The difference between that and the my in-person classes is that in the in-person classes, and I fully expect again to have classes on Tuesdays, you're going to interview somebody in class, okay? And I will post that assignment on, I still have both of them. I'm sorry, I have to update this. I'm sorry about that. I don't always recycle assignments all the time. But anyway, what you want to do is in this particular case, you're going to interview people in class. So that's for the in-person classes, okay? Um, and you're going to basically, but just like in the asynchronous class where you interview somebody you know, you're going to follow some of the same rules. 500 or 800 words, emphasize what's new and unique about that person. News, again, is the plural of new. So when you talk about new, it's like something that's basically like, you know, what's new compared to everything else. What's new as opposed to what you're learning something new. You're learning that person has something that's a newish quality about them compared to everybody else. And what you want to do is you want to like, and this is what I call my very basic outline of a story. I'll get more specific. What is the story about and why do we care? And then like maybe a paragraph, one or two sentences, as I showed last week. And what is the story about? More depth and details. Another paragraph, one or two sentences is maybe the same. Maybe then you get into like what is unique, why is it unique, how is it unique, that sort of thing. Okay. And that again for this story, this will be due in the asynchronous class, which is the interviewing somebody you know. That'll be due a week from Monday when this video will be posted. For the I'm also going to post this on Monday for the sorry, the in-person classes. That will be posted. That story that this profile of a neighbor in class that will be posted on Tuesday, and that'll be due Tuesday the 24th. Okay. All right. So so that's what this story is about. So again, asynchronous, you're going to be doing interviewing somebody you know. I don't care who it is. It's going to be, it could be a family member. It could be anything like that. I know you're in a situation where you're probably maybe not on campus a lot, that sort of thing. So you chose this route. That's fine. So basically, stick to like, again, like what's unique about the person. I don't care if it's your mother, or your father, or whatever. Just write about somebody. Okay. All right, and then again for the in-person, I'll be actually grouping you together and interviewing each other in class. Okay, and that's actually I plan to spend much of the Tuesday class. Okay, and looking over your shoulder. Classes, I should say. Okay, that goes for both the 8:30 classes and the 10:20 classes. Okay, All right, so that's that with that assignment, which again posted on Monday for the asynchronous and Tuesday for the in person. Okay. Um, let's just like over my list of things here. Okay, but also please make sure you get those bio assignments in. Okay. Um, so I showed you a little bit about like what I called my exoskeleton of a news writing structure and what to look for. And I'm looking for this particular next assignment is a 500 word story, which by the way will also be graded. Okay. All right. So, remember that like it's going to be like essentially A, B plus, C plus, and then R. Okay. And then you typically will get a week to rewrite it. And then actually I post that as a separate assignment entry. Okay, the actual rewrite assignment. Okay. All right. All right. You also all have like the same book schedules again, but again, the asynchronous class here, it's due on Mondays, and the in-person classes will be due on Tuesdays. Okay. And if you haven't seen the book already, it is available online. This is what it looks like. Okay. It is the 13th edition of Writing for Reporting for the Media. John Bender, and I asked you guys, both classes, to read the first two chapters. Okay. All right. So let's just kind of go over that right now. Um, it's interesting because like I'm still here. It's it presents itself differently than my previous book did. It doesn't actually look exactly like what the actual physical copy did. I don't care which copy you get, by the way. You get the physical one or the ebook, it doesn't really matter. The ebook actually has like videos in it, and you can click on and kind of help basically I guess illuminate what's being talked about. And again, remember that the book, you're not being graded on readings for the book, but like I said before, the the uh I do know when people are not reading the book because they're not maybe doing their assignments correctly or not listening or that sort of thing. So obviously it also means we're probably not listening to lectures too, but it means that you're not listening to either or. So so that's how I can tell. And I consider the writing the tests for the reading. Okay. The stories that you write. Okay. So anyway, I asked you to read chapters 1 and 2. I feel like chapters 1 is actually really kind of like an attempt at really I kind of gloss over these chapters, and I'm not a big book guy, but I kind of just point out that maybe some of the most important parts. But I feel like this first chapter actually really becomes like a big thing about talking about like, why it's important to have like a traditional media. And what I like to say is and how it's evolved into this certain social media. I use this opportunity a lot to actually like talk about the history of media and how we got to where we got. Okay. All right. So, a long time ago, I mean, I know there's been a lot to said about media. I like to think there's a lot of hope for the media in the future. I know there's been stories out recently about Sports Illustrated laying off a bunch of people and everything else, but there's still, it's changed. And yes, maybe people don't get paid as much, but people who do get paid, they get paid actually pretty well. So it is still a good profession to be in. Okay. It's something that I'm still in. I'm the editor of in chief of a magazine, a magazine that actually it's both online and physical. So I'm proud of that. So anyway, um, so basically like, the media has changed over time to its current form, and you have like this chapter 1 that kind of like blasts social media and that sort of thing. But basically that's media hasn't really like it's not necessarily bad media to like actually pass the media through social media. Okay. It's just the new form, and it develops in different ways, and it self-corrects in different ways and that sort of thing. I mean, the original media was probably Paul Revere shouting, "The British are coming! The British are coming!" When before the start of the Revolutionary War in the United States of America, okay, in the colonies, okay. That was media, the town crier, okay, that sort of thing, but didn't really get mass produced until the advent of the printing press. And then that's when you had like essentially like the New York Times come in Actually, I meant to call these things up. Sorry about that. Actually, I think I have the links. I mean, don't forget, I also, as a way to keep along, I have the modules, okay? And what happened was that the media came along and like, and I have this under writing basics. It got mass produced, and then what happened was it was able to do things like that. You started do things like start newspapers and that sort of thing, and that became like the first real mass produced media. Okay, and probably one of the ways the media really kind of exploded was really during the Civil War. Um, when I'm sorry, not Matthew Perry. I was going to talk about Matthew Perry actually a little bit, but Matthew Brady. Okay. Was when a photographer by the name of Matthew Brady was actually out there taking pictures of Civil War and the victims and that sort of thing. And that essentially was like almost like their first digital media. It was like bringing home the war, not just in a not just in a not just in a written way, but in a visual way. Okay. Well, I'm sorry. Okay. So anyway, I did click. I have a little bit of a slow computer. I apologize. It's actually a little bit on the old side. Okay. So, a lot of these pictures actually were posed, which is what they did way back when. But you do see some of the effects of war. Okay. Over there, you see like trenches and things like that, maybe even some long shot videos of like of the actual war happening. There's a log cabin, looks like it's devastated. Somebody looks like there's wounded, that sort of thing. The first photojournalist Matthew Brady shocked the world. Okay, and what that did was it kind of brought. It wasn't like it came to the people's laptops or their eyes instantly, but it was like the closest thing to that, and it actually really kind of visual what made them connect to news more so than ever before. Okay. So then like through that 19th century, then what happened was like news became kind of like two things essentially. The it became either for the very elite, and that was a lot of people couldn't read. So, that was one thing, was that a lot of people couldn't read. So so it became either for that. It was written in either way for that way, or it was written in a tabloidish way that was like would essentially like sensationalize the news, and essentially was like trash news, like a lot of the tabloid news we see now. And tabloid news would be like the New York Post, like celebrity gossip, TMZ, that sort of thing. Okay. Um, you know, Maybe not all that's trash. A lot of it's important to people, but so I'm trying to actually duplicate this tab here. Oops. Anyway, this is actually the oops. This is actually the Titanic story. You can see the actual like style that was actually written for like people who were kind of like almost like it was like stuffy. It was almost like they kind of fell in love with with their words and their writing. And please don't do that. News is actually supposed to be simplistic, okay? It's not supposed to be this kind of written in a way that's like reads like Shakespeare or something like that. And I am oh, all right. So anyway, let's go to this, okay? And people want immediacy in their writing, and this chapter complains about social media and everything, but the great thing about social media, and I know Twitter has gone in it's gone in a wacky direction, that sort of thing, but Twitter is essentially like almost like the ultimate media, like new media, because what it does is it essentially provides you like almost sort of a headline or a lead to a story. I know now it's X and it's got a whole hell-bent way of doing things, but you know, but that essentially is like, what exactly what we talk about when we say like the first paragraph of every story should be basically telling you what you need to know and why. Um, Back then in 1912, they didn't do that. This is the Titanic story. A wireless message picked up late tonight. Actually, let me just get this. The White Lines, this is the story. The White Star Liner Olympic reports by wireless this evening that the Cunarder Carpathia reached at daybreak this morning. The position already, or if you're like reading out loud, and that's actually not a bad way to actually edit your stories, is actually to read out loud. If you have to read out loud a story and you like lose your breath, you know that your sentence is too long or it's too wordy or whatever. Okay. That's why I suggest you actually do that because it's supposed to resemble some sort of a conversation. Okay. So anyway, at daybreak this morning, the position from which this is not how like people speak in normal conversation. Easily, they all speak in declarative sentences. Okay. From which wireless calls for help were sent out last night by the Titanic order or after her collision with the iceberg. The Carpathia found only the lifeboats and wreckage of what had been the biggest steamship afloat. So far, we haven't found out exactly what happened, and that is the Titanic sunk. That should have been the lead. It could have been the lead all by itself. This gigantic liner, the one that was supposed to be indestructible, sunk. Do you need to really say any more in the lead? The Titanic had foundered. They use words like foundered. These are like, what are these words anyway? At about 2:20 a.m. in latitude, almost giving you like, you need like a globe to look at and find out where this is. Could they say south of Iceland? This is about 30 minutes of latitude, about 34 miles due south of blah, 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 blah. All her boats were accounted for. And about 655 souls have been saved of the crew and passengers, blah, blah, blah. All right. Wordy, confusing, the whole thing. This is how they wrote back then. Okay. Very confusing. Okay. And giving them the benefit of the doubt, they probably were taking a lot of their information in from like Morse code, and they probably were at the same time trying to get the information out as fast as possible. So you can actually like read that as though it's like written in like some sort of Morse code or something like that. So, but that kind of media like was what the media was, but then radio came into play. The old new media came into play, and then TV took over, and then that's when like really like and I hate to use a bad example here, but I mean I'm sorry, horrible happening, but this I think this was so well reported. Okay, so when TV came in, they were able to deliver the news quickly and in a way that's efficient. And then what it did was it changed the way writing happened. It changed the way writing was like essentially, essentially it was delivered. And it became known that like people had to actually like essentially
in color. This is the CDS.
They actually had to essentially like, people were tuning off to the newspapers. A lot of them actually folded as a result of it. There were newspapers that were like several newspapers actually essentially delivered each day. There were like there was morning paper, there was a night paper. Sometimes they even like issued bulletin papers in addition to that. But TV kind of came in and the immediacy of TV changed all that. And you can tell by the Walter Cronkite, by the way, like was a great anchorman and a bigger person. He was like the most trusted man in America, they call him, although all he did was essentially deliver the news. But he was actually somebody who actually like would actually write his own stories and that sort of thing. And it was well written stuff, but it wasn't written in biblical proportions. Okay, it was written in like a way that everybody can understand, as I described before. The fourth grade level writing. Okay, and it was delivered in a way it was direct and active voice. Okay, and this essentially like invented the style that we know of today. Okay, where we like understand like maybe the most important details at the top, and then we fill them in with details that like the smaller details that help paint the larger picture. So let's look at like what he delivered here.
The Evening News.
And I should say that actually newspapers actually had to change their style as a result of this. Again, okay, because it was the only way they could connect.
With Walter Cronkite and Russ Hodge in Memphis, Tennessee, Dan Rather in New York, Bernard Kalb in Saigon, Marvin Kalb in Wellington, New Zealand, and Bert Quint in Khe Sanh, South Vietnam.
Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee. Police have issued an all-points bulletin for a well-dressed young white man seen running from the scene. Officers also reportedly chased and fired on a radio-equipped car containing 2 white men. Dr. King was standing on the balcony of his second.
Just hold on for 1 second, please. Kathleen, I'm on the tape. Anyway, let me just go back to my tape.
Floor hotel room tonight when, according to a companion, a shot was fired from across the street. The friend's words, the bullet exploded in his face. Police, who have been keeping a close watch over the Nobel Peace Prize winner because of Memphis' turbulent racial.
Okay, so obviously the lead was that this great apostle of nonviolence and civil rights leader, this person who was probably one of the greatest Americans, one of the greatest people in world history, was shot and killed. And then it provides like some of the details that fill that in. Even, it's interesting because, well, it's horrible, but like a lot of people didn't like Martin Luther King back then. And, basically he still felt like the compelled to identify him, who he was and the impact he had. I mean, now it's almost just like almost universal, I like to think. Is like, even though we've had like people do some really bad things in recent years, it's terrible. But Martin Luther King, they still had to essentially identify him and who he was. So everybody can understand who he is and what kind of impact he had. What had happened? I mean, I actually felt like, wow, this is actually graphic. Some of the stuff they actually talked about. The bullet exploded in his face. You want to know what happened and where. It's really a horrible vision that they painted there. It was obviously an assassin, and they had to point out the person was actually white, because obviously this is part of the unfortunate racial strife we've had for forever. And all the details that fill in from there, and then like why he was there, some of the specific reasons and that sort of thing. So it gets into maybe some of the smaller details, that sort of thing.
Situation were on the scene almost immediately. They rushed the 39-year-old Negro leader to a hospital where he died of a bullet wound in the neck. Police said they found a high-powered hunting rifle about a block from the hotel, but it was not immediately identified as the murder weapon. Mayor Henry Loeb has reinstated the dusk to dawn curfew he imposed on the city last week when a march led by Dr. King erupted in violence. Governor Buford Ellington has called out 4,000 National Guard.
Now we kind of paint more of the scene of what's happening. Again, these are important details. It shows the impact of what happened, what has happened as a result. A lot of overreaction too, and also, but it's actually like the smaller details that are not as important that go down to the lower part of the story. Okay, but at the same time, it's all connected to the same theme of what the assassination of Martin Luther King and what happened, why, and where, and how, and when. Everything is consistent.
Guards. Police report that the murder has touched off sporadic acts of violence in a Negro section of the city. In a nationwide television address, President Johnson expressed the nation's shock.
America is shocked and saddened by the brutal slaying tonight of Dr. Martin Luther King.
So that also shows the import of what happened, that the president actually had to speak to it, that sort of thing. So, anyway, that simple delivery, again, like I said, changed everything. And even though it was on written paper, people still like to read papers. They still prefer that. So they felt as though newspapers felt like they had to kind of address that. So what they did was they changed their style, and like a year later, they didn't change their style that year, 1968, but they did change their style around that time. And I have it right here, actually, the Man on the Moon article. You can see is far cry different from the from the Titanic story. Now you could definitely argue with the gender identification they use here, because they make it seem as though like men are like the only people on Earth or something like that. And I am really dealing with. Okay, we got a pinwheel here. I want to show you a little bit about like how this story. Okay, wow, it's going really slow. Okay, I have a pinwheel. Okay. All right. Well, if you could just just wait for a bit right here. Anyway, what they did was they essentially like, basically, no person had ever been on the moon before, and no person had ever, or well, actually, to be honest with you, they haven't been on the moon since 1972. So, it's really going slow. Okay. I am really sorry about that. Okay. Anyway, I think my computer also has frozen. Okay. I apologize for this. This is really going slow. Okay. Hmm. All right. Let me just try to adjust things here a little bit. Trying to actually just get rid of this tab. Okay. All right. Anyway, I hope you can hear me because my screen is actually frozen. Okay, and as long as they're modulating smoothly to the historically at 4:17 p.m. Neil Armstrong, who was on there, radio to Earth. Okay. Houston Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Okay. And then they also had his first words here, which you might have heard already. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Okay. And that's it. That's pretty much how it went. And then and unlike the TV though, you get the longer story. You get the more of the details. You get what they call a sidebar story that provides more of the details, actually like the actual radio transmission of how it happened, that sort of thing. So, all right. Now we have like social media, which is essentially the evolution of that, and that changed a lot of things too, and it made newspapers fold and the whole thing. Some of them are like still in trouble. I don't like to show X, but there's also Threads, which is from Meta, Facebook and Instagram. And this is how like essentially news is delivered now. It's also, you see it's still going a little slow. It's also delivered through your phone, and I get these breaks. I get these these email breaks. I got this one from CNN, and it says NFL weather protocol questionable. Freezing temperatures at the Chief Dolphins game cause hypothermia and frostbite for some fans. It could spark change to NFL's cold weather policy. So they give you essentially what is the lead to the story in these breaking news alerts now. Okay. And people are still reading the news, and maybe they're not reading as long as as far as they used to, but this is the new form of delivery and platform now, and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay. And when they complain about social media, I mean, this is actually how I found out. And that's why I had Matthew Perry up, because I was a big fan of Friends. And that's how I found out that he had passed away in October. And then what happened there was essentially, one of the big questions people had was like, how are the Friends people reacting, that sort of thing. And, what I really like was what Courtney Cox did here. I don't know if you like Friends or not, that's fine. I don't care. It's my generation. If I was a member of the Friends cast, I would have been right in the middle age wise, believe it or not. I would have been in between Ross and David Schwimmer and Matt LeBlanc, Joey. So anyway, this is how she basically talked about this, and this makes news when they finally came out like a week or two later and talked about how Matthew Perry died and how they missed him, that sort of thing. This made news. So there's really nothing wrong with that. It's actually a way of directly connecting with the public, and we get to see things we never saw before. She says, I am so grateful for every moment I had with you, Maddie, on the show. She and her character and his character had a relationship, and they got married. He had a lot of problems with drugs and alcohol, that sort of thing. It's well documented. I read his book twice. When you work with somebody as closely as I did with Matthew, there are thousands of moments I wish I could share. For now, here's one of my favorite moments. To give a little backstory, Chandler and Monica were supposed to have a one-night fling in London, but because of the audience reaction, it became the beginning of their love story. In this scene, before we started rolling, he whispered a funny line to me. He often did things like that. He was funny and he was kind. Okay. So let's take a look at this. This is actually, what she does, she actually shows what actually showed on the actual show, and then what happened on when he actually filmed the scene, which is different because it's before the editing.
I was here. I was here.
But even though it happened 26 years ago, it was news because a lot of people had never seen that before. Some of us were Friends fans that had heard about the long crowd reaction. We just didn't know how really long it was. And it was long. And that's basically what they used to judge the rest of the show by. And the rest of the show essentially became a lot about the relationship between these two characters, and how it eventually evolved into marriage, that sort of thing. So when the book complains about social media, there's a lot you can get from social media you can't get from other things. I mean, it shows like different ways that I mean, there are ways of safeguarding against that. Like right here, it shows you, talks a lot about, a lot of the stuff that Trump was talking about during his election. I don't care what side you're on, but there was a lot of like fake stuff coming out from his camp and that sort of thing. Every camp, there's a lot of fake stuff, but I don't want to. But his side especially, it led to an insurrection. He's been indicted, the whole thing. So, and then what the ebook does is it actually gives you essentially like, discussions on basically like, how social media can actually have that negative side and how it can affect elections and how important it is to really kind of have some sort of mainstream objectivity out there, whether it's on social media or not, okay? To basically report about things that actually, make sure that they have some sort of foundation, a basis of research, okay? Let's maybe look a little bit at this here, right here.
This election has been defined by disinformation, the fact that it's been systematically done over the years, in particular, at least 10 years, by Marcos Jr. I mean, how will this play out? How was it even possible? So
This is actually about the Philippine election.
I think what you're seeing in the Philippines is emblematic of every election that will happen globally this year. And you're talking about at least 32, I believe, right? And what this shows you is exactly how systematic information operations can impact and change reality in plain sight. Rappler spent a lot of time looking at the data, looking at the evidence, and we saw that as early as 2014, not coincidentally, the same time that information warfare began in Crimea, right for the annexation. Well, in 2014, that was when the Marcos disinformation networks began and shifted reality, shifted history in front of our eyes. And this has led to today. He didn't win the vice presidency in 2016, but then they just doubled down. It's almost diabolically brilliant if you think about it, right? If you're in a car skidding on ice, what you're told to do is to press the gas and turn into the skid. That's exactly what Marcos did. He admitted, for example,
and essentially what Trump did when he told people to go show up at this insurrection thing that happened on January 6th, 2021, did the same thing. A lot of that, and then he came out, you might remember he was banned from Twitter because of it. He came out with disinformation on Twitter, basically telling people that, oh, you're good people, the whole thing, just go home. But he continued to say election was rigged, the whole thing, and then he got banned from Twitter, okay? A lot of that first chapter basically talks about like, journalism principles and technology and how basically even with technology, journalism still has to maintain its principles. It's better to be right than first. Okay, again, it's better to be right than really even opinionated. If you're going to be opinionated, you should be right. Okay, you should have your foundations, you should have your facts. Basic foundation and principles of journalism remain relatively constant while tools and technologies change. Journalists provide tools to audiences accurately and ethically. Technology simply provides reporters with alternative ways to gather, organize, present, and distribute information efficiently. So, you know, it's the kind of thing like where you probably heard from your parents or maybe whatever, whoever people have ever guided you in life to like really be careful about the kind of sort of things you put out there, even on social media, because it could lead people astray, that sort of thing. So, here's some more about the Trump story and how it's so consumed in national media from Bloomberg.
Story so consumed national media that I think a lot of folks didn't realize what was actually happening in local news at the same time. How has local news evolved through the Trump years?
It's not going well, Emily. Frankly, local news isn't.
Now this actually goes into more about like how the local news platform, which is what I formerly did when I worked at Patch, we actually covered individual towns and that sort of thing. And how a lot of that has actually changed and shrunk and been consolidated and that sort of thing. And it's been replaced by like social media bloggers and things like that. Yeah, I said bloggers, I know. But you know, there's an opportunity for people out there to like still continue local news and a report on, but just make sure that you have your facts. And sometimes that's actually done just by like Facebook groups, Instagram groups, whatever. And but making sure that wherever you still put out there on that whatever platform is still accurate.
Crisis. And it's not because people don't want local news. In fact, people really do want local news. But the rise of the internet has meant that the business model of local news has been completely disrupted as advertising, which was the primary source of revenue for local news, has moved online. And what that means is that throughout our country, papers have closed. At the beginning of 2020, there were 1,800 communities that had had a local paper in 2004 and did not in the beginning of 2020. And that has only accelerated during COVID-19. And, you know, it can be easy from afar to just say, like, this is the normal rise and fall of an industry. But in fact, the implications are really dire. Communities.
Okay, well, that also is I'll get a little negative. I don't, some of these videos are all a little bit negative, but shown. You know, so basically, I mean, just like before, I mean, probably now more than ever, it says all news outlets need trained journalists with high standards. And it's great that like a lot of people who take this class actually are not actually in journalism. Some of you actually decided to switch after this class or whatever. That's great. You need to brag, whatever. But you know, trying to keep in mind different things that I look for. I mean, in my in-person class, I actually have you guys cover a meeting. So we don't do that in the online class, but you know, that's one of the things that actually has kind of fallen off the face of the earth is actually a coverage of local meetings like school board meetings, things like that. And believe it or not, actually like your local town governments and everything, including your school boards, are actually like have more of an impact on you than like whatever Trump does or whatever. Because actually that's like what you pay in taxes, is like your schools, you need that for property taxes, that sort of thing. But you know, where you park on the street, you know, if you're in New Brunswick and you have to park on the street, decisions are made about like, you know, like where you can park, where you can get a permit, how much a permit is, that sort of thing, what kind of fine you have to pay, you know, when if you actually get ticketed. So things to keep in mind, like a mission and purpose, civics, culture, all different things, technology, critical thinking, all these. This book gives you a guide, essentially, the judgment, the different things, the ingredients that have to really go into every story. Okay, evidence, obviously. Okay, you know, trying to back up what things you say, and that's actually what you know. That's one actually when you actually do a story, you want to have a lead that basically identifies what the story is about, but then the rest of the story essentially identifies and provides the evidence to back up the lead. Okay. Journalism style, I've talked about that, about, you know, there's different terms like graph or graph, paragraph, there's a headline. I'm not going to be doing any headline writing in this class, okay? That's actually something that's like a different style of writing. I will explain that probably a little bit more in depth and probably more individually because I see a lot of people do that early on. A lead is actually written like a typical sentence with in every lead, first paragraph of a story, almost always. As a noun and a verb, okay? you basically want to have a full sentence, and a full sentence is a noun and a verb, okay? A headline doesn't always have that, and it's almost always written in the past tense, because you're usually writing about something that happened already. I know not all the time, but, all right. There's terms like copy, byline, that's where your name is listed, okay? AP style book, I talked about that. That's like when you required text for the class, okay? Okay. So let me just move on here. Okay, this is a better chapter actually, because this actually talks a little bit more specifically about what goes into a news story. Okay, so let's see, like, so as more and more video of the insurrection emerges, the public learn about the violence of the mob, such as attacks. So basically, like, it talks about how, like, essentially, like, news, is supposed to provide more depth, like, no matter what platform it is, like when things happen, and to stay on top of issues when they happen. Because we want to continue, because it's not just the one time you find out the who, what, where, how, why, when, but it goes on and on and on. New developments come out. We're still learning things about this insurrection we didn't know 3 years ago. So some of the things to look for in terms of like identifying a story, timeliness, I've talked about that. That's one thing to look for when you actually do this profile story. In the asynchronous class, you do it on a person you know. In the in-person class, you do it on a person in class. Is that you want to like write about like the thing that happened most recently to them. You want to, or I shouldn't say that. You want to write about something that's new and unique about them, but you want to make sure that it's focused on the now. It could have been something that happened maybe 10 years ago. Okay. That was really interesting and unique. Maybe it was a car crash or something like that. Maybe about this physical injuries or blah, blah, some things like that. But what I want to know, what the most important thing is now. Like what kind of impact did they have on your life? How did it, have you overcome it? Are you still dealing with it? How are you doing that and overcoming that at the same time? That's actually a better story than the actual incident itself, because it's inspirational. If you're 10 years later and you had this terrible accident, and 10 years later you're overcoming and you're doing it in the ways, maybe you lost a leg or something like that, and you're overcoming it, that's can be an inspirational story. And people want to know, are you around? Are you alive today? They want to know about that. Impact or magnitude. We talked a little bit about that. The things to look for. I mean, the person on the moon, obviously like that's technology, but it's also like, it was the first time it ever happened. It was big in the space race, it was big in the Cold War sort of thing. Then let's look at modern times, the insurrection. That obviously continues to have an impact because you have a person running for president who's actually been indicted over it. Is he going to win? Is he not? What sort of impact will have it on the presidential race, that sort of thing, who people might vote for, how the world may be shaped, how the Supreme Court might be shaped, that sort of thing, okay? Prominence, that's interesting in a way, because like, it's like, a lot of times when you write a story about somebody, you don't always like put their story, actually, especially if somebody may be involved in an accident or some achievement or whatever, you don't always put their name in the first paragraph, because that's not the most important part. It's the person actually accomplishing something or a person getting hurt or something. But if it's somebody who's like a celebrity or something like that, and it happens then like a Matthew Perry who's died or something like that, then you would put that name in there because it's an identifiable name. That's a prominent name. Okay, so you look for that sort of thing when you actually look for stories. It's not just like a person, but maybe it's happened in a prominent section of town. Maybe it's something that involves a prominent position in the world, like presidency, that sort of thing, or maybe the mayor of your local town or something like that. Okay, so what's another thing you want to look for when you do a story? Okay, proximity. Obviously, we were just talking about local news before, but did it happen nearby? Is it a traffic accident that affected like commuter routes? I know it's not as much of a thing since so many people now work from home and everything, but not everybody does. But it could affect things like going to the supermarket or whatever. That's especially important, things like traffic news, that sort of thing. We're not just that, but crime news. People want safe neighborhoods, that sort of thing. Unique. We want to know if it's something that's like unique to you, not everybody else. Something that maybe only you, or maybe only a few of you actually do. Okay. And yes, conflict is actually another thing that actually like is something that's looked for. And I know that like a lot of people complain about that because they say like, well, if it bleeds, it leads. If it's bad news, that's news. If it's good news, it's not. Well, it's good news, it could be news, but a lot of times good news is when things are just happening and that, you know, the roads are clear. Do you write about that? You maybe you write about that, but you don't write about it in depth, you know? But when a traffic accident happens or something like that, you write about that because it changes people's routines. So it's not necessarily like, you know, and then obviously like if you have a crime story or something like that, I like to think that people are compassionate, that they care about what's happening to them or their fellow people in town, that sort of thing. And, you know, they have like maybe some sort of compassion, you know, what's happening, that sort of thing, okay? And by the way, again, please ignore these like questionnaires that happen at the end of these chapters or during these chapters, that sort of thing, okay? Again, we want to be objective. News stories are not opinions, pieces, or editorials. News stories must be objective in the sense that they report actions, words, or situations without commenting. We are basically just flies on the wall, and actually it helps your credibility when you actually remove yourself from the actual situation, okay? Sensationalism, obviously, is when you exaggerate things, and that's, you know, we want to avoid that, hyperbole. Offensive details, you know, if something that's like, you know, gross or disgusting, that's really kind of like gratuitous and doesn't need to be there, then it's, it doesn't need to be there, okay? I mean, I was watching this movie the other day and I was like wondering how like certain things should be in. It's about a plane crash that happened in 1972, where actually there was a cannibalism involved because we were survivors, and they were showing certain things that I just wondered if like actually need to be shown, you know? I mean, is it really like pertinent to the story, you know? Or is it just for shock value? Okay. Obviously, accuracy being such a paramount thing. Accuracy, clarity, and focus are my three main tenets. If you're not accurate in terms of like identifying the news, then you have no credibility essentially, and that's your biggest selling point in news. Okay, is being credible. Okay, somebody, you know, that when people like look at your name or look at your publication, they know they can trust it. That's a big thing in names, and I might have talked about this already, but like if you have a name, again, if I have talked about this already, I apologize, but you know, getting names spelled right is like pretty huge. Okay. So, oh, there's something I have. I'm sorry. It's actually here actually. If you okay, if you have a name like Chris Brown and that's like spelled different ways, you know, you want to make sure that like it's actually like spelled in a way that is the right person's name. Okay, if it's that, and you just kind of normally assume it's that Brown without an E, you could be like, and then you say that person and like, I don't know, is charged with murder. You could be like essentially like libeling somebody, okay? Because you didn't like bother to get that person's name spelled right. Could be another person's name in town is spelled that way, and then suddenly everybody thinks that person's a murderer. So you want to make sure you're absolutely accurate on everything you print and everything you do, okay? Okay, let's just kind of go through a little bit more here. I think we're actually winding up a little bit here. Yes, we are done with that. And just give me 1 second. I'll save. Stop sharing. Okay. So that's our first two chapters. And then we have our first graded assignment that's now posted. Okay. Be doing a week. And then like I will then, you know, please get that in, and then I'll be doing the doing a rewrite for that. Just a little bit of warning on that. I've rarely given out E's on first drafts, so don't be like too upset about that. It happens. You know, you got to learn how to do, and the best way to do that is to actually learn by doing. So that's what you'll be doing. Okay. All right. So thanks very much, everybody, and I will be talking to you. And let me know if you have any questions at all. Thank you very much.